שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מרים השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן לבוא רגליך, אל ינום שומרך.
Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study, Shabbat Torah study. I am Hakham Melech Rahmiel Ben Yaakov, and I welcome you to the study. So, hope you all are doing well. Everything is pretty well here in Israel. It's been really pretty quiet lately, which doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way, but it has been pretty quiet. Let's first do a sound check. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm broadcasting from a slightly different location today. I'm broadcasting from outside, so if there's a bit of background noise, just let me know, and I can switch over to putting on my headphones, which will be better sound. So first of all, can you guys hear me okay? That's number one. Please just type in a Y or a 1 to let me know that you can hear me okay. Anybody? Sound check, please. Okay. At any rate, I will. Okay, good. If it gets bad, if it gets too noisy, or if you can't hear me, then just let me know, and I'll go put on my headphones because there is some background noise today. Okay. So let's see. What can I say? It's been an interesting couple of days. I've had some interesting discussions with people here in the Golan Heights where I live. And I think the main point that I had an interesting discussion with a friend today who he is definitely a rabbinical Jew, but kind of open-minded in his own way. And we're talking about what would solve the problems in the nation of Israel. You know, there's a lot of problems. There's war. There's economic problems, there's social problems, all kinds of things going on, and it's certainly not over yet, even though it is quiet at the moment. And I gave my opinion, as I always do when I get into these conversations, that the only thing that is going to solve the problems in the nation of Israel is if we return to the true Torah, to the true Tanakh. If we reject the two false philosophies that Israel is following. On the one hand, rabbinical Talmudic Judaism, and on the other hand, secular liberal culture. And if we return back to the true Torah, to the true Tanakh. And actually, I think the worst of the two, quite frankly, is rabbinical Judaism. As a friend of mine always says, he would rather live under a liberal secular state, as we have right now, at least in name in Israel, rather than a Talmudic state, or as he calls it, a rabbino-fascist state. And I couldn't echo the sentiment more. Not that I'm a big fan of secular liberalism, but given the choice between secular liberalism and rabbinical Judaism and a Talmudic or a rabbino-fascist state, I will take the secular liberalism, which is in its own way closer to kind of a libertarian state any day than a Talmudic theocratic state. Wouldn't even be a contest. So I was having this discussion with my friend, and he said, "Well, what do you mean, Melech? What are you talking about? I mean, what does that mean to you? Returning to true Torah? You know, how does that? How would that make a difference? Okay, what does that mean? Let's say for Shabbat, right?" And so I said, "Well, I'll give you an example. Okay, you basically as a religious Jew, think of all the things that you refrain from doing on the Shabbat. You don't turn on and off electricity. You don't use the internet. You don't use the phone. You know, you can't call family members, let's say back in the United States. You can't call friends. You can't turn on the air conditioning if it gets too hot. You can't turn on the heat if it gets too cold. and so on and so forth. You're restricted to a very limited type of activity on the Shabbat, which the Torah does not call for. Now, if you try to go sell that form of the Shabbat to the nation at large, as the rabbis have been trying to do since the foundation of the state, even before the foundation of the state, which was officially founded on May 14th, 1948, but already there had been aliyah, there had already been immigration to Israel starting really in the mid to late 1800s. So if you go try to sell that to the entire nation, then it's not going to work. They want nothing to do with it. The nation has a long time ago made it very clear that they reject rabbinical Judaism. They actually made it clear even before the foundation of the state and even before the beginning of mass immigration back to the land of Israel, eventually which became the state of Israel. They had already made it clear in many ways back especially in Europe, with things such as the emancipation, Haskalah, those are the Enlightenment. There's been a trend of rejecting rabbinical Judaism for a couple of hundred years now, and the trend continues. So from the religious, or from the dati, from the Orthodox, the rabbinical Orthodox point of view, this is a big mistake, right? This is a rejection of Torah. This is a rejection of Tanach. This is a rejection of God, Hashem as they call him. This is a rejection of everything that's good. And their goal and their campaign that they wage every day throughout the country is to try to get the people of Israel to return to Judaism. And they define Judaism, of course, as Talmudic Judaism, as rabbinical Judaism. And they believe in their eyes, and I know this because before I became a Karaite about 30 years ago at this point, close to 30 years ago, a little over 25 years ago actually, officially, but even then before then I'd already been moving in that direction. So before I became a Karaite, I knew the mentality, and the mentality was, well, the religious, meaning the Orthodox, the Talmudic rabbinical Jews, we're the good ones, and everyone else is the bad ones. They're the rebellious ones, and we, the Talmudic rabbinical Orthodox Jews, are the non-rebellious ones who are following the ways of God, who are following the ways of Hashem, as they call him. Hashem just means the name, because they will not say the name. And everyone else is either mistaken, flawed, what's called a tinuk shenishba, meaning like a baby who grew up in a child that grew up in an environment where they didn't know any better. And okay, so let's everybody please say a prayer for Hadassah Thomas. Shabbat Shalom, brother. She says, I can't stay for the teaching. My mom fell and is having surgery to repair some nasty wounds. Please say a prayer for her. Her name is, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Wunsile. Thank you, Shalom. Okay, so we hope, of course, that your mother feels better, and may she be protected and blessed by Yahweh and have a quick recovery, and may everything be okay. All right, Hadassah, see you next time. So getting back to this, this idea that the Orthodox think that, wow, 92, amazing. Ad mea ve'esrim, as they say, may she live to 120 years old. So the idea that the dati'im, the religious, think that they're correct and everyone else is wrong, and everyone else is either flawed or stupid or has been brainwashed or is outright evil, is such a myopic view of what's really going on. In fact, what they can't even realize and they can't even perceive is that they are the rebellious ones. And as I've been saying for years now, and I'll translate it into English, the dati'im are the chilonim, and the chilonim are the dati'im. What does this mean? The ones who declare themselves, or who think of themselves as religious, are actually the non-religious ones, and the ones who don't think of themselves as religious are actually the religious ones. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that the average normal Jew living in Tel Aviv, or living in, I don't know, let's name another random city, Kiryat Gat, or living here in the north in Tiberias, just your average Jew who's not particularly religious, who is maybe traditional to one degree or another, or even not, is actually closer to keeping the Torah from a true Torah slash Tanach slash Karaite slash Chosrim B'Tanach, whatever you want to call it, perspective, than is someone who is keeping the rabbinical form of Torah. And I'll give you an example, okay? Your average person in Tel Aviv, your average non-religious Jew living in Tel Aviv, average, how are they going to spend their Saturday? Okay, their Shabbat. They may not declare it as a Shabbat, and actually many of them kind of do in one degree or another because they have family traditions. So they might light the Shabbat candles. They might do certain things that they got from their parents or their grandparents. But let's just say your average secular Jew in Tel Aviv. Okay, they're not going to be working on a day like today. Because most businesses are closed. Okay, there might be doing things such as, I don't know, fixing the house, fixing the plumbing, stuff like that, but probably not. Because most of the people who are going to be doing that, let's say the electricians and the plumbers, are also going to be taking the day off, because Shabbat is basically a day off in Israel, just as, let's say, Sunday, although it's not really anymore, but when I was growing up, even back then in the 1980s, Sunday was kind of a day off. Many stores were closed. Or when I lived in Portugal for 4 years, for sure, Sunday was a day off. Stores were closed for the most part. A lot of restaurants were closed. Certainly government offices were closed. So maybe that's even a better example, right? But what is the average Jew in Tel Aviv going to be doing today? He's probably not going to be working. He's probably not going to be, fixing his house or something like that. Well, some certainly will. But again, because those who would be the plumbers or the electricians or the painters, whatever, probably have the day off because it's Shabbat, they probably won't be doing that so much. And they'll probably be maybe getting together with their friends, maybe sitting in a restaurant, maybe sitting in a coffee shop. And so, of course, the ones running the restaurants and the coffee shops are working, but the ones who are just sitting in the restaurants and coffee shops and getting together with their friends, or maybe taking a hike or taking a little trip, getting in the car and getting together with some friends, or maybe going to the movies or something like that, whatever they do, they're actually keeping the Shabbat in a much more normal and natural way than, say, a rabbinical Jew who thinks he's keeping Shabbat but is doing crazy things like not turning on and off electricity. I remember we used to be taught when we learned in rabbinical yeshiva, when we learned in rabbinical religious school seminary, that you can't even rip things like toilet paper, right? So they would pre-rip the toilet paper. I still remember having to pre-rip the toilet paper on Friday afternoons because you're not allowed to rip on the Shabbat. That's one of the 39 melechot, or it falls under the category of one of the 39 melechot, the 39 forms of quote-unquote work or activities that the rabbis say are illegal to do on the Shabbat. So they're not. So these rabbinical Jews are thinking they're all religious, are actually doing these ridiculous things which have absolutely nothing to do with Shabbat, such as, again, not using electricity, not even ripping toilet paper, not writing. Let's say you want to write down an idea you had, or let's say you want to write down a poem that you're thinking of. Another example would be playing music, right? There's nothing wrong with playing musical instruments on Shabbat. It's a great time to play musical instruments. It's one of the ways that you can worship and that you can connect to Yahweh. So they're not playing musical instruments. They're not listening to music, except whatever songs they may be singing in the synagogue, which are usually, well, not everyone has such a good voice, let's put it that way, so it can get kind of annoying, although some people do have good voices. But they're not really focusing on that. They're not doing things like, what would be another example? On the Shabbat, I used to like to do a little bit of gardening, not any heavy gardening, but gardening in a way that it made me feel relaxed and at peace. Maybe I'd trim a couple of bushes here and there, or sow the soil. Again, not as part of work, but as something that I felt that was very relaxing. I didn't do it because I had to do it. I do it because I wanted to do it, and I didn't do it for a long period of time. I do it for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. It made me feel really good, as gardening does, and then I'd sit down and rest. So the idea of Shabbat is to rest, is to relax, is to read, to get together with friends, to have a nice meal, to talk to family members on the phone, to play some music, or to get together with a group that plays some music in honor of God, in honor of Yahweh, to do all these wonderful things that any normal person would do on their day off when they didn't have to work and when they were told that they cannot work. Okay, if I said to you, listen, tomorrow's a day off, you just take the day off. Okay, you don't have to worry about work. You don't have to worry about fixing anything around the house. You don't have to worry about shopping or running any errands. Tomorrow's your day off. Okay, what would you do? Whatever you would do on that day. Okay, are you going to go? Or would you go to the beach and relax by the beach? Would you get together with some friends? Would you have a nice meal together? Would you write some poetry or maybe write some thoughts down? Would you meditate? Would you take a walk? These are all things that you can do on the Shabbat. Except many of these things are forbidden to rabbinical Jews, and they think they are keeping the laws of the Torah. They think they're being very pious, but in fact, as it says in the Torah, "Lo tosifu v'lo tigra'u," do not add and do not subtract from the laws that I give you. What they're actually doing is they've added so much to the laws of the Torah that they're not keeping the laws of the Torah. Did a video about this many years ago, giving the analogy of reaching a mountaintop, the pinnacle of a mountain. Okay, so if you climb up a mountain and you reach the top and you keep on going, then you come down the other side of the mountain. That's not being at the top of the mountain. That's not being at the pinnacle of the mountain. That's not being at the apex of the mountain. That's going back down the mountain on the other side. And that's what I compare rabbinical Judaism to. They've added so much. If the balance is keeping the laws of the Torah, if you do too little, if you take away from them, then you're not keeping the laws of the Torah. But if you do too much, you're going up past the peak and going back down the other side of the mountain, and you end up back down on the other side of the mountain. You're not keeping the laws of the Torah. So this is the kind of example that I'm thinking of. And there's so many other examples. When you think about what rabbinical Judaism is and how it deviates from the Torah, again, I happen to be a vegetarian, but the mixing of milk and meat, which has no basis of the Torah, it's do not cook a kid or a baby animal in its own mother's milk, the milk of its mother. And they extend this to mean separation of milk and meat together, so they won't even eat cheeseburgers. Unless you live on a farm where you know where the milk is coming from, the meat is coming from, the chances of going to a store, to a butcher buying meat, and then going to another store and buying cheese, and somehow the cheese being made with the milk of the mother, even then it's not even being cooked in it. I mean, right, the whole thing is ridiculous. And there's so many other examples. The boring, hideously boring prayer services that they have 3 times a day. I used to call it being minyan napped. A minyan is there's a rabbinical law that you need 10 people to pray or to do the full prayer service. And so a lot of times when I used to live in Jerusalem, now I live in the north of the country, but when I used to live in Jerusalem, I'd be walking on the street and it was time for the afternoon prayers. And they'd say to me, Ipalata yom, Ipalata mincha, did you do the afternoon prayer service already? And because they needed 10 people. And sometimes I even after I became a Karaite, they would ask me if I could be the 10th person in their gang, in their group, and I felt sorry for them, so I'd say yes, and I always regretted it afterwards because it's the most boring thing on planet Earth. You just sit there and you just repeat at about 5 million miles an hour these scripted prayers. It's a completely meaningless experience for the most part. And so I don't know how I got into that. The basic bottom line is all of the things that the rabbis do are such a deviation from the Torah. There's so many things that have been taken away from the laws of the Torah by them. So many things that have been added to the laws of the Torah by them, including regarding the laws of Shabbat, that it's not even recognizable as the laws of the Torah anymore. It's a different religion. It's a derivative religion, as I like to say. There are 3 derivative religions of Torah. Number 1 is Islam. Number 2 is Christianity. And number 3 is rabbinical Judaism. None of them are Torah. None of them are keeping the laws of the Torah. Every one of them is a derivative and distorted religion that is that is in some way based on the text of the Torah, but they've deviated from the text of the Torah. And if I had to rank them, as I always say, I think I would probably I don't think I would rank rabbinical Judaism number 1. I think I would actually probably rank Islam number 1. Believe it or not, I think that the way that the Muslims keep their laws is actually closest to the laws of the Torah, at least the laws of the Torah that are applicable to all of humanity. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that in the countries where they used to, I guess they don't do it anymore in Saudi Arabia, I'm not saying that chopping off someone's hand is sanctioned by the Torah I'm certainly not saying, I'm certainly not in any way, shape, or form talking about, what happened, let's say, on October 7th or something like that. These are all deviations in many ways from a much milder form of Islam that I saw, for instance, when I was in Morocco, and I spent close to a year of my life in total, not in one straight block of time, but overall, about a year of my life in Morocco. Spent about a month in Tunisia, and so the more, I would say, average or mild form of Islam that the average person in Morocco keeps is in a certain way much closer to the Torah. What do I mean by that? Let's even take their example of their form of kashrut, halal. So with halal, there's no idea of separation of meat or milk. They do have forbidden animals. Of course, some of those forbidden animals deviate from the Torah. So the Sunni, I guess it's a bit more complicated than that, but in general, the Sunni will eat seafood. The Shia, such as the Muslims in Iran, will not eat seafood. They will eat camel, but there's a more natural idea of quote unquote kosher, permitted and non-permitted foods in Islam, which is that there are just certain animals you're not supposed to eat. There's no concept of separation of meat and milk, and some of the other crazy laws that the rabbinical Jews bring in for what they call kosher foods, the laws of kosher foods, the laws of kashrut. So in that sense, I mean that Islam is actually closer in many ways, in my opinion, to original Torah than Christianity, which is outright idol worship, and rabbinical Judaism, which is some bizarre derivative religion, which has very little to do with, or has very little overlap with original Torah. Some overlap, but not so much. So the prescription for the future of this nation, for the nation of Israel, and the prescription that I see for the only future for the nation of Israel is to move away from this false form of, or this false religion known as rabbinical Judaism, known as Talmudic Judaism, which is really, it's kind of a syncretism, if you can use that word in this case. It's kind of a mix of two religions, which was original Torah, and then influence from Babylonian / Persian Zoroastrianism, from Greek Hellenism, from Roman thought and law, and from all of the rest of the craziness. So, for instance, a lot of the mysticism that entered into Judaism during the Middle Ages was picked up from the Muslims and the Christians, really especially from the Christians during the Middle Ages on the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, when there was a mix with the Moorish takeover of the Iberian Peninsula in the year 711, lasting until the Muslims were finally kicked out of the Iberian Peninsula in 1492 with the Treaty of Granada. So for approximately 700 plus years, there was a kind of golden age, a mixing of Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and they all interacted with each other. And so the Jews at that point picked up a lot of foreign mysticism, especially from the Christians, to a certain degree also from the Muslims. So, Judaism as it entered, the 20th century, the 19th century, had already picked up so much garbage, so much sludge, so much mire and muck and dirt from all of these different foreign cultures that it had already become more and more unrecognizable. But even if you go back, there's one rabbi who I debated not too long ago, who he kind of recognizes this, but he wants to go back to the Mishnah. Okay, so the Mishnah is the original compendium of rabbinical quote unquote oral law, the laws of the Pharisees or the rabbis, and even there's a lot of very strange and bizarre stuff. So you don't have to follow it all through the Talmud and through the later periods, the Midrashic period, the Gaonic period, the period of the Rishonim, the period of the Achonim, etc. It doesn't matter. You don't have to follow it all the way through for the past 2,000 years. You can go all the way back to the original compendium of rabbinical law, and you see already that it's a deviation from the Torah, and that the rabbis essentially instituted their own derivative religion known as Judaism, or known as rabbinical Judaism. And until this is eliminated, until the nation of Israel eliminates this foreign religion, eliminates this bizarre, distorted version of, or derivative religion based on Torah from its midst, then there will only be problems in the nation. And certainly 90 plus percent of the people who do not consider themselves Orthodox Jews, who do not consider themselves rabbinical religious Jews, want nothing, absolutely nothing to do with this form of religion. And this is because they are back in the land of Israel. There's something that they realize that it's time to go back to the source here in the land of Israel. I remember even when I used to learn in a rabbinical yeshiva, they also used to kind of promote this idea that was put forth, I think, originally by a certain rabbi named Avram Yitzhak Cohen Cook. It doesn't matter. That his idea was that the Jews who are coming back to the land of Israel cannot contain, they cannot relate to. Their souls are too great to contain the Judaism of the exile. Except he defined the Judaism of the exile in a slightly different way. He made his movement made certain modifications, very few modifications actually, to rabbinical Judaism that they thought was a more, they got rid of some of the I wouldn't say got rid of, but they downplayed some of the more some of the stringencies of the rabbinical Judaism of the exile, but they really didn't get rid of it altogether. And until it's gotten rid of altogether, until rabbinical Judaism is completely eliminated from the nation of Israel, until the sick, distorted, derivative religion based on Torah is completely eliminated from the nation of Israel, and we return to the true Torah, we return to the Tanach. Chozrim b'Tanach, as I always like to say, is the name of, I call our movement the World Alliance of Qara'im, the Karaite movement, but I also call ourselves, the secondary name that I gave to our movement a couple of years ago was the Chozrim b'Tanach movement, the Return to Tanach movement. And until the entire nation returns to Tanach, we can only expect more problems, more wars, more missiles, more destruction, more terrorist attacks, more tension, more social tension between the religious and the non-religious and the various sects or the various intermediary groups that fall in the very spectrum of those two main categories. We can expect more economic problems, the economic situation in Israel is not easy for the average person. In other words, we're going to continue to have a lot of problems until this nation, once and for all, wakes up, arises, and throws off this false form of Judaism and returns to the Tanakh. Chozrim b'Tanach. Returning to the Tanakh, returning to the true Torah is the only future, is the only way ahead for the nation of Israel. So with that being said, I will close today's monologue. We're going to take a break for 2 seconds. Let me just I have to plug in and get set up. And then we're going to dig into the book of Zechariah, the book of Zechariah. We are in chapter 12, and we'll start with chapter 12, verse 7. So if you want to queue up your Shoham, show. What is my cat doing? Show. At any rate, show, you can't do that, sweetheart. Come, over here. Okay, so to make a long story short, we'll be back in about 5 to 10 minutes or so. Let's say 5 minutes. I'll try to make it. And then we will start learning the book. Shoham, you cannot do that. You can't do that, sweetie. You cannot do that. You absolutely cannot do that. Okay? Can't do that. Okay? All right. See you guys in about 10 minutes. I'll put on some music, and we will be right back.
Avram Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Avram Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Cuando el rey Nimrod al campo salía, vino en el cielo y en la estrellería, viendo los santos había de nacer Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. La mujer de tierra penada, día ella preguntaba, ¿qué tiene la cara tan demonada? Ella ya sabía el bien que tenía. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Al fin los meses quería, iba caminando por campos en viñas, y a su marido no le descubría, topó una mara liparería. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. strong. Faster! With the sting of the whip on my shoulder, with the salt of my sweat on my brow, and only God am I, and you hear your people cry, help us now, this dark hour, deliver us, deliver us, Lord of all, remember us, here in this burning sand, deliver us, there's a land you promised us, deliver us to the promised land. ילדי הטוב והרע, אל תירא ואל תפחד. My son, I have nothing I can give but this chance that you may live. I pray we'll meet again if you will deliver us. Hear our prayer, deliver us from this very years of slavery, broken road to stand. Deliver us. There's a land you promised us. Deliver us out of bondage. Deliver us to the cross. Hush now, my baby, be still now, don't cry. Sleep as you're rocked by the stream. Sleep and remember my last lullaby. So I'll be with you when you dream. River, oh river, flow gently for me. Such precious cargo you bear. Do you know somewhere he can live free? River, deliver him there.
Okay, we're back. Once again, this is the World Alliance of Qara'im Shabbat Torah study, and we're going to dig now into the book of Zechariah, the book of Zechariah. We're in chapter 12. We're going to start in verse 7. I'll share the screen in a second. I just want to do a sound check, so please let me know if you guys can hear me okay. Again, just type in a Y or type in a 1 so that I know that the sound is okay, the video is okay. And if there ever is a problem with the sound or the video, or if we're talking about texts, then hold on 1 second, please. One second. One second, please. Sorry. One second, please. Sorry. Okay. Good. Okay. So I'm sorry about that. I just had to do a quick communication there. Okay. So good. I'm glad you guys can hear me. We're digging into the book of Zechariah, the book of Zechariah. We are in chapter 12. Let me share the screen and let's see what we got. Okay. Okay, I hope you guys can see it. Should be able to. Let me just make sure everything's good here. Good. Okay, we're good to go. So we're in Zechariah chapter 12. Let me do my little new trick that I learned. My favorite new trick, the split view. Ah, I love it. Zechariah. There we go. There's Zechariah chapter 12. And let's go to the English on this one. So you guys can see both the Hebrew and the English. And what I'm going to do is, as I usually do, because the book of Zechariah, the book of Zechariah is a bit complicated, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read again from the beginning of chapter 12 in the English until we get to the verse that we want to start learning with. And that verse is going to be, as we said, verse 7. Let me just confirm that. Yep, verse 7. Okay. Although this chapter is a little bit more straightforward. Okay. So we have, and I'm just going to read the translation here. Well, I'll read the Robert Alter translation. It's better. Okay. So a portent, the word of Yahweh. And by the way, whenever you see the word Lord in English, that is the way that the English translations translate Yahweh. Yud He Waw He. So I would always recommend, as I say to my students, I would always recommend reading that in the English as Yahweh. So it's not the word of the Lord, it's the word of Yahweh. And why don't they translate it as Yahweh? Again, it really comes from the influence of the ban on the name that the rabbis instituted for close to, in varying stages, close to 2,000 years now, on the name of Yahweh. So most rabbinical Jews, if you ever run into Orthodox rabbinical Jews, they will never say the word Yahweh, the name Yahweh. In fact, that is one of the most taboo things that you can say. It's it's up there probably with murder in their eyes, and I'm not exaggerating either. It's one of the worst things you could say, because in their eyes, it's taking the name of God in vain, the name of the Lord in vain. But of course, as long as it's done respectfully, and as long as it's done not to make false oaths, then not only is it permissible to say the name of God, Yahweh, but we're enjoined to many times, probably hundreds of times throughout the Tanakh, to call out to Yahweh, to call out to his name, to honor his name, to swear by his name. So there is no ban whatsoever in saying the name. The name of Yahweh should be said, should be repeated as much as possible. Again, of course, in good faith and in a good context. But it should be repeated. It should be proclaimed as much as possible. The entire world needs to know the true name of God, which is Yahweh, as laid down or as revealed to Moses in Exodus chapter 3, verse 15. So that being said, one more second. Let's plug something in here. Just keep the bugs away. As I said, I'm broadcasting outside. It's a very nice evening. It's a warm day here in Israel. So I'm broadcasting outside, and my cat has settled down a little bit. Right, Shosho? You're behaving yourself now, aren't you? So, right. So the word of Yahweh concerning Israel said, Yahweh, who stretches out the heavens and founds the earth and fashions the spirit of man within him, meaning within man, I am about to make Jerusalem a bowl of poison to all the peoples around. And Judah too shall be caught in the siege against Jerusalem. So what does this mean? We explained it last like a bowl of poison. So the nations are going to attack Jerusalem. They're going to come to Jerusalem, and they think they're going to drink Jerusalem as if they were to drink, a nice sweet drink, meaning they're going to just easily destroy it. And in fact, when they drink that drink, it's going to poison them. That's going to be the end. Their attempted attack, their attempted conquering of Israel, their attempted conquering of Jerusalem is going to be the end of them. It's going to be attractive. It's going to look like a nice, sweet drink, maybe a nice smoothie or something like that, and it's going to end up poisoning them to death. That's the allegory. That's the metaphor that we have here. Okay, and Judah too shall be caught in the siege against Jerusalem, and it shall happen on that day that I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all the peoples. All who lift her burden shall surely be scraped. So again, lifting is the metaphor for conquering Jerusalem, right? And when they try to lift up this stone, then they're going to break their back doing it, or they're going to be scraped, they're going to be scratched by it. While all the nations of the earth gather against her, there we have explicitly, the nations of the earth will gather against her. And this is clearly end of days prophecy, it would seem. It's a bit difficult to pick out what is end of days prophecy and what is prophecy for the time of the return of the exiles from Persia, or the reestablishment of the resuscitation, we could say, of the settlement of the Jewish settlement in Judea in ancient times that was allowed by the Persians. But it seems that this is an end of days prophecy. In other words, this has not yet happened. This is speaking about what's going to happen in the end of days, which may very well be upon us in this era. On that day, said Yahweh, I will strike every horse with confusion and its rider with madness, but upon the house of Judah I will open my eyes, while all the horses of the peoples I will strike with blindness. And the leaders of Judah shall say in their heart, the dwellers of Jerusalem are strength for me through Yahweh, their God. Okay, so again, we have here, I will strike every horse with confusion, its rider with madness, but upon the house of Judah I will open my eyes, while all the horses of the people I will strike with blindness. Again, they're going to come with their weapons, and every weapon that they fashion against us will be used against them, or will at least they will be defeated in confusion and disarray when they attempt to attack Israel, when they attempt to attack Jerusalem. And the leaders of Judah shall say in their heart, the dwellers of Jerusalem are strength for me through Yahweh their God. On that day I will make the leaders of Judah like a flaming brazier among wood, and like a flaming torch among sheaves. And there we have again flaming brazier. A brazier is like a fancy way of saying, I think we translated last week as a fire pit, right? So Judah is going to be, so the wood, again, the metaphor there, the wood are the foreign nations that are coming to attack Judah, that are coming to attack Israel, and they're going to get burned up by Israel. They're going to get burned up in that attack. And like a flaming torch among sheaves. What's a sheaves? Sheaves are stalks of grain, dry stalks of grain, of barley and wheat, specifically or mostly. And their attack is going to, so in other words, the analogy here is that they're going to attack Israel, and they're going to be like sheaves that are burnt up in a fire. So the metaphor is the same again and again. These nations are going to come. They're going to attack Jerusalem, which is I think the technical word would be a synecdoche. It doesn't matter what it is. It means, again, it means basically Israel. Jerusalem is being used as a metaphorical, or as a stand-in for Jerusalem, just like when you say Washington spoke to Moscow, right? That really means that the representatives of the United States spoke to the representatives of Russia. So Jerusalem is possibly being used here in the same way, and it really means attack on Judah, or in modern day terms, an attack on Israel. So the enemies that come to attack Israel, they are likened to wood, and Israel is likened to the flaming brazier, to flaming fire pit. They're likened to dry stalks of grain, and Israel's likened to a flaming torch. In other words, they think they're going to be wood. They think they're going to be stalks of grain. They think they're going to drink a cup of refreshing lemonade, and it's going to be poison. They think that they are going to, let's go back up. They think that they're going to dispose of Judah dispose of Israel, like lifting up a stone and just throwing it away, and instead they're going to break their back trying to do it. All of their armies are going to come with arrogance and haughtiness, and they're going to leave with disarray and confusion. They're going to be horribly defeated. That's the prophecy. Again, I'm paraphrasing there, of course. That's the prophecy that's being spoken about. Okay, and they shall consume on the right and on the left all the peoples there round about. That's again speaking about Judea, in modern terms Israel. So Israel is going to consume on the right and on the left all their enemies round about, and Jerusalem shall dwell in its place. It shall be re-inhabited. It shall be inhabited. Okay. All right. So that brings us up to verse 7. Let's go back to the Hebrew. Let me just check in to see if there are any comments or any questions. Hope you guys can all hear me okay. Again, yes, the greeting of Boaz, that is correct, is the best example. That's the best example of the use of the name in just in colloquial in a colloquial setting. So that's in the book of Ruth. And if I remember correctly, we can just find it. Well, we won't go to it now. We'll just get distracted. Okay, but it's the name of Yahweh is used in a colloquial setting in the book of Ruth. Okay, so we're in verse 7. We're going to pick it up in the Hebrew. You can follow along in the English. Okay. And I'm going to read in the Hebrew again. Let me just make sure that everyone sees the screen okay. Looks good. And so what do we have? Hoshia, Yahweh et Ohale Yehuda. So Yahweh will give salvation, will save the tents, literally the tents. Here they translate as the dwellings of Judah, but it really literally means the tents of Judah, Yehuda. Barishonah, first and foremost, Lim'an, lo tigdal tiferet beit David. Oops. למען לא תגדל תפארת בית דוד, ותפארת יושב ירושלים על יהודה. In order that the glory of the house of David, David, and by the way, David is spelled here in the long form, okay, what's called mater lectionis, for those of you who are learning biblical Hebrew or who know biblical Hebrew, you see David is spelled also with a yud. Okay, so it's David, and that's a long form. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Tiferet Yoshev Yerushalayim, and the honor or the glory of those who inhabit Jerusalem, Al Yehuda. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? Well, that is a bit cryptic. Let's see if we can get a little bit of commentary. We'll go to Robert Alter again, who we like to go to, and so the prophet introduces a somewhat surprising political note here. Even though Jerusalem is the capital, it should not think of itself as the exclusively important domain of God's people. And to that end, he will rescue the regions outside of Jerusalem first, but the next verse offers a counterbalance to that statement. Okay? Okay, right. So that does make sense, actually, right? So in other words, we'll say the dwellings, okay, or literally tents of Judah will be redeemed or will be saved first, right? So it's not going to be, the focus is not going to be only on Jerusalem. Okay, so basically, so the house of David and the city of Jerusalem, or the inhabitants of Jerusalem, don't get full of themselves. They aren't full of themselves. The whole focus isn't going to be just the house of David and Jerusalem. It's going to be all of the territory of Judah. All of Israel is going to be saved. Okay, again, Israel in modern terms. Okay, I'm trying to put it in modern terms because this does seem to be an end of days prophecy. Okay. All right. Verse 8. Bayom hahu yarein Yahweh ba'ad yoshev Yerushalayim. So on that day, Yahweh will be a shield for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Uhaya hanichshal bahem bayom hahu ki David. And so it will be the meekest among them, okay, the least successful among them, nichshal. Kashal means like to to let's get a formal definition. So that's verse 8. We gotta switch over to the Hebrew. Okay. And let's get the biblical dictionaries. We have a couple of biblical dictionaries here. Okay, so kashal is to fall, to stagger, to totter. Okay, this here, for those of you again who are getting into Hebrew, getting into biblical Hebrew, this is the root. Okay, kashal. This is a kaf. This is a shin. This is a lamed, kashal. And if we go down to the BDB, then we have again to stumble, to stagger, to totter. Okay. And there's examples of its use. Okay, so we get the idea. So nichshal is in the passive form. So what's called the nifal form. Let's see, they give an example here. It's in the perfect. Okay. Consecutive, and they're also translating that as equivalent to the kal form. Again, if this is all grammatical details, if you're not familiar with Hebrew grammar, don't worry about it. Okay. So they're basically saying here that this form of the verb, the nichshal, is the same as kashal. And we do have a phenomenon that in some of the, again, if you're not into biblical Hebrew and the grammar of biblical Hebrew, don't worry about this. But there is precedence that in the later books of the Tanakh, which is Zechariah would be counted as one, because it's written at the time of the returning exiles from Persia, that sometimes what's called the Ba'al form is changed to the Nifal form. The active is changed to the passive. At any rate, we're not going to worry about that right now. So those who most stumble, okay, who are again, okay, who are the most stumbling or staggering or tottering, okay, among them, among who? Among the inhabitants of Jerusalem. On that day, by Yomahu, on what day? On the day that all of the nations come and attack Israel. And again, I use Israel just as the modern term. It's really speaking about Judah and Jerusalem. So the weakest among them, or the feeblest, the NIV translates it as, among them, okay, David will be like David. David. Uveit David, and the house of David, Elohim, Malach Yahweh lifnehem. And the house of David shall be like a god, okay, or like God. It would be godlike, maybe is a good way to translate it. Malach Yahweh lifnehem, and it will be like an angel, literally a messenger of Yahweh before them. Before who? Before these nations. Okay, so what this is saying is this is projecting the incredible power and the incredible strength of, again, I'm using Israel, right? Assuming that we're now approaching the end of days, incredible power, the incredible strength that even your average, klutz, your average, nerd is going to be as powerful as David, as King David, and the house of David is going to be like an angel from heaven. That's how powerful they're going to be, right? So this is a prophecy of the projection of, or the incredible power that will be given to Israel against its enemies by Yahweh, by God, in the end of days, when its enemies come and think they're going to have an easy go at it against Israel, as they have tried a number of times in 1948, in 1967, in 1973, and most recently, of course, in the war that started on October 7th, 2023, the tragedies of October 7th. So that, of course, was a big failure on Israel's part, but, we we've kind of recovered from that to a certain degree, at least for now, and hopefully it will stay that way. Okay, Haya. We're in verse 9 now. Okay, Haya biyomahu avakesh lashmid et kol hagoyim habaim al Yerushalayim. And on that day, I will seek out, destroy all of the nations that come against Jerusalem. Okay. Alrighty, let's see if we can get a little. Let me just check in to see if there are any comments or questions. Shabbat Shalom, Karaite 132. Shabbat Shalom, user HZ4YU8G. Wow, my God. I guess you're worried about you're concerned with privacy. Oh, I know what that is. I think maybe. Okay. Anywho, so right. So back to here. All right, so let's get a little bit of commentary. Let's see if Robert Alter has anything to add to this. So be like a god. The Hebrew uses the polyvalent. Polyvalent means having many values. Poly meaning many, and valent related to the word value. It's a polyvalent. So many value Elohim, which can mean God, God, divine being, right? So it can mean God like with the big G, God with a little g, like a God or divine being. And that's why when I translated as godlike, right? So it's not necessarily specifically speaking about Yahweh-like. It means godlike, divine, right? The first of these three senses should be excluded because it would be too extravagant, I agree, and theologically admissible to say the house of David was like God. It's basically saying like a God, right? To the attacking nations. Okay, that's verse 8. Now in we did verse 9. So in verse 10, ושפכתי על בית דוד ועל יושב ירושלים ברוח חן ותחנונים. Let's translate up until there. And I will pour out upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace, v'tachnunim, and a spirit of supplication. That's what they translated here. The tachnun, also related to, it also comes from the same root chen, tachnunim. So maybe this is not such a great translation of supplication. Maybe more like chen, like grace and the asking for grace. Let's see how Robert Alter deals with that one. Okay. Spirit of grace and graciousness. Yeah, he's good. He's good. He's a good translator, right? So we see that's the sign of a good translator. He's really good, I gotta say, right? So we see how he picks up on the fact that in the Hebrew, it comes from the same Hebrew root. Okay, so again, for those of you who are starting to learn some biblical Hebrew with me or on your own, by the way, I do offer biblical Hebrew classes. If you're interested in learning biblical Hebrew, I am kind of filling up at this point. I have a bunch of students, but if there still is a little bit of room left, we do one-on-one lessons. And if you're interested, just contact me privately, and you can get to the point, perhaps that you're starting to read the Tanakh in the original Hebrew, which is really where all the silver and gold lie. That's where you really get an understanding of what the Tanakh is saying. The English is often very two-dimensional as opposed to the Hebrew, which is very three-dimensional. But because Robert Alter is a good translator, what he does is he picks up here, it says, I'll just say the words in Hebrew, chen, and here he says with tahanunim. Okay, every word, just about every word in Hebrew has a root, usually a three-letter root, sometimes a two-letter root. But here there's a two-letter root, het nun, hen, and here we see the same letters, hen, het nun. So you can even hear the similarity in the two words, chen. With tachanunim, han, you hear the chen, and han here, chen, tachanunim. Okay, so they translate here the NIV, which is a good translation, translates it as grace and supplication. But Robert Alter, which is a much better translation, picks up on the fact that both of those words, chen and tachanunim, are coming from the same underlying Hebrew root, meaning grace, usually in English. And so he translates it as grace and graciousness, right? So he's trying to use he's very careful, or he's very creative with his translation, and he picks up on the fact that it comes from the same, those two words come from the same Hebrew root and makes them have the same English root, grace and graciousness. Very good translation. Okay, so we'll go with his, okay? So again, let me translate up until here. So I will pour out upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and graciousness. Wahibitu elai et asher bakaru. Oh boy, that's a loaded phrase. V'saftu alau וספדו עליו כמספד על היחיד, וחמר עליו כהמר על הבחור. Okay, what does this say? So, and they will gaze. They will gaze upon me. It's a sher dakaru, the one that they have stabbed, or here they translate it as pierced. That's obviously a loaded translation. The NIV is a Christian translation. Okay. And this is clearly, well, we'll say what it means. Let's just get a translation first. And they shall mourn or eulogize, we'll say mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and they will become bitter. Okay, from the underlying root mar, which means bitter. So they will bitterly weep over him or bitterly mourn over him. As one bitterly mourns over the death of his firstborn. Okay, so what the heck is going on here? Okay, let's try to get a little bit of translation and interpretation. Okay. So luckily, Robert Alter again does not use the word pierce because that's a loaded word, right? Remember, the NIV is essentially Christian translation, a very good translation overall, and it doesn't too often try to insert Christian theology into its English translation. But at the end of the day, it is a Christian translation, the New International Version, and it does once in a while, and that's one of the places that they translate. The NIV translates it as pierce. Robert Alter very carefully does not translate it as pierce; he translates it as stab. They shall look upon those who were stabbed and mourn for them like the mourning for an only child, and they shall grieve bitterly for them as one grieves bitterly for a firstborn. So we can get a little bit of interpretation there on verse 10. Okay, so grace and graciousness, two cognates appear in Hebrew, chayin and tachnunim. While the latter elsewhere means supplication, the present context suggests that it has a sense close to chayin. That's exactly what we said earlier. Look upon, the Masoretic text has looked to me. Eli revocalized here as Eli. Okay. We won't get into that. That's a technical point. It is puzzling. So mourn for them like the mourning for an only child is puzzling. That prophecy promising the destruction of Judah's enemies and pouring out of a spirit of grace upon the people should conclude in this wave of desperate mourning. The least complicated explanation is Rashi's. Not a big fan of Rashi, but okay, once in a while a broken clock is right. In the battle to defend the city, many have fallen by the sword, and so the triumph is darkened by deep sadness over the terrible losses. Okay, we'll go with that. It is a bit of a confusing verse to make sense of. Again, we can translate it literally. Hold on one second. I'm just going to turn on the lights here. Give me 1 second, please. Don't sure you're getting well now. Be right back. Oh, shoot. Okay. 1 second. I'll be right back. אז אולי אני לא הדלקתי נכון. אוקיי, רגע שנייה. סליחה, אני לא עשיתי נכון. אוקיי. Okay. So let's translate that again. ושפכתי על בית דוד ועל יושב ירושלים, so I will pour out upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem, ruach chen v'tachnunim, a spirit of grace and graciousness. We'll go Robert Alter's translation there. V'haibitu alai, and they shall look upon me. Et asher dakaru, they shall look upon those who were stabbed. V'saftu alau, and they shall mourn over them. A little bit paraphrasing here, as they would mourn over an only child. Hamer alau, and they shall bitterly weep over him as they would weep over their firstborn. Okay, all right. We're in verse 11. Let me just check in to see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, verse 11. Okay, Be'omahu, ביום ההוא יגדל המספד בירושלים כמספד hadad rimon b'mikat Megidon. So on that day, the mourning over Jerusalem will be greater than the mourning over Hadad Rimon. I'll talk about this in a second. B'mikat Megidon, in the valley of Megiddo. Okay, so Megiddo is a famous place. There's a mountain which you can visit if you come to visit Israel. And by the way, if you do come to visit Israel, talk to me and I'll be happy to show you all over the place. This is what I love to do. So the mountain of Megiddo is called in Hebrew Har Megiddo. It also has a place in the end of days prophecy, as we will see. And Har Megiddo was distorted in, I believe, the Greek, I would assume the Greek, into Armageddon. So Har Megiddo is Armageddon. Megiddo is a place that can be visited even in this day, and that's what we have here, Megidon. It just has the on ending, probably because it closes the sentence. So Megidon. Let's talk about this a little bit and see what's going on. So this is verse 11. As great as the mourning for Hadad Rimon. These are two Canaanite gods here conflated as they may have been popular in popular religion. The mourning indicates Hadad Rimon was a dying god like Tammuz and like the Greek Adonis, whose annual descent into the underworld was marked by rites of grief. Okay, so so we get the context there. Okay. So this is, again, Hadad and Rimon are gods. Again, let's read the explanation here. Okay. So Hadad Rimon made an annual descent into the underworld. So he died each year. Okay. And then arose afterwards. Sounds familiar. Let's even take a look. Let's learn a little bit more about one of these gods. So Hadad, God. Okay, we can go to Rabbi Wikipedia for a second, and let's just get a better idea of what's going on here. Okay. So Hadad. It was a storm and rain god in the Canaanite and ancient Mesopotamian religions. He was attested in Ebla. Ebla is a city that has been excavated, as a matter of fact. I was actually just watching a documentary on Ebla last night. So from the Levant, okay, what is Levant? You can see it right there. Levant basically means modern day Israel, Syria, Turkey, more or less. Lebanon. From the Levant, Hadad was introduced to Mesopotamia by the Amorites, where he became known as the Akkadian god Adad. Adad and Ishkur are usually written with a logogram. This doesn't matter. The same is used for the hair. This is all very technical. Hadad was also called Rimon. So Hadad was also called Rimon and a bunch of other things, or simply Baal. Baal was probably the most famous of the ancient gods. Here we have a picture of Hadad. We can see that his horns on his head, so he's kind of a bull god. And here we have the word Rimon, which is also mentioned here in this chapter, in this verse in Zechariah. So Hadad Rimon, right? So that seems to be two names, or again, kind of conflated names, two different gods which have the same similar characteristics. Okay, however, the latter title was also used for other gods. The bull was the symbolic animal of Hadad, as we can see here. So there's a picture of Hadad. He appeared bearded, often holding a club and thunderbolt and wearing a bull-horned headdress. Hadad was equated with the Greek god Zeus, the Roman god Jupiter, as well as the Babylonian Bel, which is related to Baal. So the Baal cycle, or Epic of Baal, is a collection of stories about the Canaanite Baal, also referred to as Hadad. It's comprised between 1400 and 1200 BCE, so around the time that the Torah was given, more or less, in the desert, and rediscovered in the excavation of Ugarit, an ancient city in modern-day Syria, one of the most important cities to be excavated. The storm god Adad and the sun god Shemesh jointly became the patron gods of oracles, blah, blah, blah. Let's go on a little bit. And So interesting. But let's just see here. Is anything else we want to talk about? I think we get the idea. We're just going to get too much into the details here, which we don't need to get into for the purposes of the study. So okay, in the valley of Megiddo, near Armageddon, near Har Megiddo, near the mountain of Megiddo, and we'll talk about that at a later time. Okay, so the land, we're in verse 12. Again, let me check in and see if there are any questions or any comments. Okay. All right. וספדה הארץ משפחות לבד. And וספדה הארץ, so literally the land will mourn. משפחות לבד. So this literally means families alone. So it means each family alone. Okay, here they translate as each clan by itself. Robert Alter translates it as, okay, shall mourn clan by clan. Mishpachat Beit David Levad, I should say. So the house of David alone, in other words, shall mourn alone. Unishehem Levad, and their wives alone. Mishpachat Beit Natan Levad, the house of Natan, of Nathan, alone. Unishem Levad, and their wives alone. All right. So what does that all mean? So we don't have a interpretation here, so I'm not sure. I'd have to do a little bit of research to see what we're talking about by the house of Natan. It's possible that that's speaking about the prophet Natan. Nathan was one of the prophets that accompanied David. So if we're speaking about the house of David, then maybe it would be appropriate for also be speaking about the house of Natan. On the other hand, it could be speaking about another Natan. Let's see if we can get a little bit of other commentary. So this is verse 12. So we're going to go back to Zechariah chapter 12, verse 12. And we'll look at some of the commentary on it. Okay. That's Christian commentary. We don't need that. Okay, so this sorrow should be universal, but also individual, the whole land, and that family by family, the royal family, direct line of its kings, and in a branch of Nathan, the son of David, and a whole brother of Solomon. Okay, so that's what Nathan is speaking about, one of the sons of David. Okay, which was continued on in private life, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we don't want to get into Christian stuff. Let's look at this for a second. So this is in 1 Chronicles 3:5. And here we see the lineage of David. So these were the sons of David born to him in Hebron. The first was Ammon, the son of Ahinom of Jezreel. The second, Daniel, the son of Abigail of Carmel. The third, Absalom, he was a troublemaker. The son of Maacah, daughter of Talmi, king of Geshur. And by the way, you can visit in northern Israel the city that it was believed where the kings of Geshur resided. The fourth, Adoniah, the son of Hagit. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Avital, and so on and so forth. Those six were born to David in Hebron where he reigned 7 years and 6 months. David reigned in Jerusalem 33 years, and these were the children born to him, and we have a whole list, and one of them is Nathan. Okay, so that's, okay, so now that makes a lot more sense, right? So that makes a lot more sense. Let's read it again, now knowing that it's speaking about Nathan, the son of David, and not Nathan the prophet. So the land shall mourn, family by family, clan by clan. Levad mishpachat David, the house of David shall mourn alone. Levad Nashem, and their wife shall mourn alone. Levad mishpachat Beit Natan, the clan of the house of Natan. Okay, so a sub-clan of David, right? Natan is one of the sons of David, so that would be a sub-clan of the house of David. Levad alone, and their wives alone. Verse 13, Mishpachat Beit Levi, Levad, the house of, or the clan of the house of Levi, alone, with Nishem Lavan and their wives alone. Mishpachat Shimei, Levad. So who's Shimi? I believe that was another son of David. If I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Shimi. Shimi, 6 David, 30 Shamua. Yeah, Shimi. This is the same one. Okay, so this is Shimi. So there's another house. Right. So we're clearly speaking about the various sons of David, right? So Shamua here in First Chronicles chapter 3, verse 4 is the same as Shimei, and that's what it's speaking about right here. Okay. So again, so the sub-clans or the clans from the house of David, the different clans from the house of David are being mentioned here. So they'll mourn alone and their wives alone. Kol hamishpachot hanish'arot mishpachot lavad u'neshem lavad, and all of the remaining clans, all of the remaining families, clan by clan or family by family alone, and their wives alone. Okay, so I guess it's trying to paint a picture again. If we go back to Robert Alter's interpretation there. No, it wasn't there. It was in this. It was this here. Okay, so this sorrow should be universal, but also individual, the whole land, and that family by family, the royal family in the direct line of its kings, and its branch from Nathan, the son of David, and the whole brother of Solomon. Okay, we can skip the Jesus part. In like way, the main priestly family from Levi, and a subordinate line from a grandson of Levi, the family of Shimei. Shimei, so is not the son of, that makes sense, because it occurs after after Levi. So let me go back and just look at that again. Mishpachat Beit Levi, Lavad, Nashem, Lavad, Mishpachat. Okay. Right. So it's talking about a subclan of not of David. So Shimei is not of the clan of the line of David. It's of the line of, it's a grandson of Levi. Okay, and that makes sense because it's in the context of Levites mourning. And all the remaining families, each with their separate sorrow, each according to Joel's call, let the bridegroom go forth out of his chamber and the bride out of the closet, each denying himself the tenderest solaces of life. Shosha, what are you doing, Shosha? Okay, let's see if there's anything else that we have to add here. I don't think so. I think we get the idea. We could read one more commentary. Again, hopefully this doesn't insert some kind of Christian theology here. If it does, then we'll just skip it over it. Okay, in Zechariah 12, 11, 14, the magnitude and universality of the mourning are still further depicted. In Zechariah 12, 11, in that day, the mourning in Jerusalem will be great, like the mourning of Hadad Rimon in the valley of Megiddo. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 12, and the land will mourn, every family apart, the family of the house of David apart, and their wives apart. This is not really adding much. This is a translation. And then we get into Christian theology, so we don't want anything to do with that. I think we get the idea. The wives apart, the manner of the Jews in mourning was by shutting up themselves, retiring from company and pleasure. Here, families retire. Nay, in the family, wives retire to bewail their sin and their fathers. Again, here we go with Christian theology. We'll skip that. You guys get the idea. Okay. So that brings us to the end of Zechariah chapter 12. Any questions? Any comments? Next time we'll go into First Chronicles 3:19. User whatever says. And where were we? Yeah, First Chronicles 3:19. Oh, okay, very good. Thank you. The royal line after the... No, this is not speaking about the Shimei, I don't think. That's another Shimei. But the Shimei that's being spoken about is mentioned in Numbers. We get the exact... We can look it up very briefly. Where was it? Numbers 3:23. Okay. And let's go here for a second. So this is the Gershon. Gershon was one of the sons of Levites. So to Gershon belong the clans of the Libnites and the Shimeites. Okay, so the Shimi right there. So the Gershonite clans would camp on the west, but etc. Okay, that's the one that's mentioned right there. So again, Gershon is one of the sons of Levi, and Shimi is one of his sons, and that is at least according to this interpretation here. Shoham, behave yourself, sweetie. Shoham, behave yourself. No, we don't do that. Is referring to one of the grandsons of Levi, and that actually makes sense because here we have, so this is from here. Okay, this is all house of David in verse 12, and then we have the house of Levi, Beth Lewi. Okay, the house of David, and so it makes sense that the Shimi mentioned here is one of the clans of House of David, just as of Levi, just as the house of Nathan seems to be one of the sons or one of the clans of the house of David, one of the sons of David. Here, one of the grandsons of Levi. Okay, so that's the end of Zechariah chapter 12. Next time we'll go on to the second to last chapter, the penultimate chapter of Zechariah, chapter 13. But now we're going to take a break for a couple minutes, and then we'll go into Leviticus chapter 26. So Leviticus chapter 26 is more narrative. It's the blessing and the curse. So there's not so much detailed law that we saw in Leviticus chapter 25. Leviticus 26 is the blessing and the curse. So let's take a break for a couple minutes, and I'll put on music for a minute or two, and then we'll come back and we'll get into Leviticus chapter 26. So see you guys in just a bit. Good, sweet.
זה עוד יום שישי, נושם את האוויר, האור והצל משחקים שוב תופסת. השולחן ערוך, תמונות ילדות על הקיר, שיירות לבנות חוזרות מבית כנסת. והריח הזה ששורט לי את הלב, מתגנב ופותח דלתות אל אושר קטן, אל אותו שיר ישן שעובר אצלנו במשך דורות. מתנות קטנות, מישהו שלח לי מתנות קטנות, רסיסים של כוונה, עיגולים של אמונה. מתנות קטנות, מישהו שלח לי מתנות קטנות, כמו הכוח לקבל את מה שאין, את מה שיש, מה עוד אפשר כבר לבקש. זה עוד יום שישי, מרפסת ועיתון, השמש כמו הדאגות לאט נמחקת. מנגינות פשוטות זוחלות מהחלום, ושום שערה כבר לא תסתיר פה את השקט. מתנות קטנות, מישהו שלח לי מתנות קטנות, רסיסים של כוונה, עיגולים של אמונה. מתנות קטנות, מישהו שלח לי מתנות קטנות, כמו הכוח לקבל את מה שאין, את מה שיש, מה עוד אפשר כבר לבקש. מתנות קטנות, קיצרנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת, ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. והריח הזה ששורט לי את הלב, מתגנב ופותח דלתות אל אושר קטן, אל אותו שיר ישן שעובר אצלנו במשך דורות. מתנות קטנות, שהוא שלח לי מתנות קטנות, רסיסים של כוונה, עיגולים של אמונה. מתנות קטנות, מישהו שלח לי מתנות קטנות, כמו הכוח לקבל את מה שאין, את מה שיש, מה עוד אפשר כבר לבקש. מתנות קטנות.
Okay, we're back. Let me just get rid of some of these banners here. Good. Okay, so we're going to dig in now to Leviticus chapter 26. This is the second to last chapter in Leviticus. So we're almost done with the book of Leviticus, and we'll go into the book of Numbers. Shoham, hey, don't do that. My cat is behaving very, very mischievously today. Okay, so in Leviticus chapter 26, we have the English and the Hebrew set up. And now we have a bit of a switch. So this is more, well, this is more narrative, shall we say. This is what's called the blessing and the curse. So one of the two places that we see the blessing and the curse, the other is in the end of the book of Deuteronomy. And towards the end of the book of Deuteronomy, we'll eventually get to that as well. And let's see what we have here. We can read just to get an idea of what's going on here, okay? So these words, Leviticus 26, signal a shift. Let me just make sure I'm sharing the screen correctly. 1 second. I'm not. Okay, that should be good. So these words signal shift in the discourse to summarizing generalization for the language of this verse and the next, as Jacob Milgram was one of the leading experts on the book of Leviticus, observes, invokes 3 of the 5 injunctions of the Decalogue, reverting, one may say, to first principles. These verses then may be construed as an overture to the grand epilogue to the laws of Leviticus that swings the full momentum in verse 3 at the point which Jewish tradition marks the beginning of the textual unit for communal reading. What follows is a rhetorically powerful evocation, style switching from legalistic to rhetorical, the blessings that will ensue if Israel keeps the covenant, and the ghastly curses if it violates the covenant, both in its placement in the book and the code of laws and its own form of recognition and language. The entire passage closely parallels Deuteronomy 28. So that's what we said. We had kind of a replay of the blessings and the curses at the end of Deuteronomy. We'll eventually get to that in Deuteronomy chapter 28. And so this section is usually called the section of the blessings and the curses. And let's see why. We're in the Hebrew. We're in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 1. Feel free to follow along in the English. Again, I'll just check in to see if there are any questions or comments. Shavua Tov, the point in the heart. Okay, so what do we have here? This is verse 1, Leviticus chapter 26, verse 1. Lo ta'asu lachem elilim upesel u'matzeva lo taqimu lachem ve'even maskit lo titnu ba'artzachem lehishtahavot aleha ki ani Yahweh Elohechem. Okay, so do not make for yourselves elil based on the word el. So el means God, elil means an idol, right? Something worshiping or representing a god. Right? Idol. Pesel. So pesel is very specifically a sculpture, right? Sculpted. I think he translates it here as a sculpted image. Good. Okay. A matzeva is usually translated as, again, a sacred stone. Okay. So a sacred stone was a stone that was set up. Sometimes they'll call it a standing stone. Okay. From tzav. From the underlying root, I believe it's Yud Tzadi Vet, which means to stand upright. So they sometimes they'll translate it as a standing stone often. So it's a stone that's set up, but it's sacred. Often it's anointed with oil, and then it's used kind of as a representative, or shall we say, a place of worship, or maybe even a representative itself of a god. Okay. So lutakimu, you shall not erect. Lechem, for yourselves. Ve'even, maskit. We'll get a translation of maskit. Okay, so it's translated here as carved stone. Robert Alter translates it as a figured stone, and then he gives a little footnote here. So the etymology of the word rendered as maskit has long been debated, though it might derive from a verb that means to look. Milgram possibly suggests that the stone in question is a paving stone, hence bow over it, perhaps with a mosaic design set in the floor of the sanctuary. So nobody really exactly knows what this means. Okay. And they translate here as a carved stone. I'm curious to see how Everett Fox, another excellent translator, translates it. Let's bring him up for a second. So in Leviticus chapter 26. Let's see if we can find it. No, not bad. 140. Pretty close. Leviticus chapter 26. So he translates it as a decorated stone. Okay, so we get the idea. Some kind of stone. Okay. Lo titnu ba'artzachem, do not place within your land. Okay. L'shtachavot aleha, to bow down to it. Ki ani Yahweh Elohechem, because I'm Yahweh your God. So let's again just translate that in a flowing manner. So do not make for yourselves an idol or a carved image or a standing stone. Okay, let's say it one more time. Do not make for yourselves an idol or a carved image. Do not erect a standing stone, standing sacred stone for yourselves, and a dressed or a decorative stone. We'll go with Everett Fox translation. Do not place in your land in order to bow with the intention of bowing down to it, because I'm Yahweh, your God. Okay? So basically, don't worship idols. Of course, this is going to remind us of Exodus chapter 20. Let's take a look at that very briefly. That's the 10 Commandments. 1 second, please. Let me bring that up. So we go briefly to Exodus chapter 20. We're going to see very similar language. I'll go to the Hebrew for a second. Yeah, it's cooperating. Okay. So these are the 10 Commandments, the 10 no, it's called 10 Commandments. So, second commandment, Lo yelecha Elohim acharim al panai. There shall be no other gods before me. They usually translate it as, or in my face, before my face. So here we have Lo selecha pesel. Do not make for yourselves a carved image. V'chot tmuna, and any likeness. Asher b'shamayim al v'asher ba'aretz mitachat v'asher b'mayim mitachat la'aretz. Any likeness or any imitation of an image that of something that's in the sky, in the heavens, in the sky. And this could mean the sun, the moon, the stars. It can also mean birds, clouds, anything. Okay, mim'al v'asher ba'aretz mitachat v'asher ba'aretz mitachat v'asher b'mayim mitachat la'aretz, and which is on the earth below, meaning below your feet. And that is that which is in the seas or in the water underneath or below the land, meaning elevation wise. Okay. Do not bow down before them. Do not prostrate yourselves before them, and do not serve them or worship them. Because I am Yahweh, your God, a jealous God. And we can stop there. Okay. So it's not that you're not allowed to make carved images or a likeness of things in the sky, on the earth, or below. It's that you're not allowed to make them with the intention of bowing down to them and worshiping. How do I know this? Because King Solomon speaks about in the first book of Kings that King Solomon, when he built his palace, when he built his throne room, it says explicitly that he built statues of lions leading up to his throne, and there are other examples of statues that are not in violation of the Torah, in the violation of the laws of the Torah. Okay, so the Muslims, for instance, I was speaking about Islam earlier, but often they go a little bit overboard. So if you go to I won't say any, but if you go to Islamic countries in general, you'll see that their mosques, their buildings, everything is decorated with intricate geometrical patterns, because they take this a bit too literally. They say you're not supposed to make any image of any creation, of any creature. And so they create these very intricate and very beautiful geometric patterns, because they take this, they disconnect it from its context, meaning that you're not supposed to do it all, but that's not the context. The context is you're not supposed to make these things with the intention of bowing down to them and treating them as gods and worshiping them. Okay, so this here in the beginning of Leviticus 26 harkens back to this commandment, to commandment number 3. of the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. Okay, so let's go on. So that's commandment number 3. This is commandment number 4. Okay, and this, in a sense, encapsulates commandments 1, 2, and 3, right? So the first commandment is, I am Yahweh, took you out of Egypt. The second commandment is, you should not have any other gods. And the second commandment is, you shall not make any idols and worship and bow down to them. Okay, so really, this is kind of this, not to make the idols and worship and bow down to them. And this is kind of really a paraphrase of that third commandment in Exodus chapter 20, but it also encapsulates, or it also expresses, the ideas in the first 2 commandments of, I am Yahweh, do not have any other God, and therefore do not make idols and bow down to them. Okay, so this is commandment 4. Shabbatai tishmeru. So keep my Shabbats, my 7th days. Umiqdashi tira'u, and fear my sanctuary. What does that mean, fear my sanctuary? What it really means there is, make sure you do not enter into the sanctuary of Yahweh, or approach the sanctuary of Yahweh in a state of ritual impurity, the details of which we learned at the beginning of this book, of the book of Leviticus. We're now at the end of the book of Leviticus. And make sure that you follow the laws of the sacrifices correctly, the laws of putting aside the holy foods, anything having to do with the ritualistic aspects of worshiping, of serving Yahweh in the ritualistic manner, very specifically with regards to the sanctuary, okay, the tent of meeting, so-called, okay, Ani Yahweh. And we have that refrain in what we spoke about as a holiness code, Leviticus chapter 17 through 26. This is 26, that the secular scholars mark this off as a holiness code, because we have this refrain again, or a number of refrains, but one of them is Ani Yahweh. We're constantly reminded, or Yahweh constantly reminds us why we do this, because he is Yahweh. Ani Yahweh, I am Yahweh. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can get any interesting commentary here. Not so far. Okay. Verse 3. Im v'chukotay telechu wa'et misvotay tishmeru wa'asitem otam. So if you walk in my statutes, it's usually translated, the word hukotai literally means in my statutes, the underlying root. Remember, we said every Hebrew word, just about every Hebrew word has something like et does not, or but just about every Hebrew word has a 3-letter root, some of them 2-letter roots. Here we have a 2-letter root. Okay, hok means to engrave. That's why this is usually translated as statutes, right? Like statue, to engrave. Okay, so statutes. I'm not sure they translate statutes here. Actually, they don't. They translate as decrees, but it's usually translated as statutes. Okay, so if you walk in my statutes, what mitzvotai tishmeru, and you keep my commandments, asitem otam, and do them. So the rabbis like to make a big deal out of the difference between statutes and commandments and judgments, and I don't make a big deal between them. This is a clear case of ribui milim, of parallelism, where things are repeated for the sense of emphasis. So yes, you can translate this: walk in my statutes and keep my commandments, but there's no technical distinction that I've been able to find. The rabbis like to say there's a technical distinction between what is a chok. They say it's a commandment that cannot be logically understood, and they say mitzvah is one, I guess, that can. And they want to make a technical distinction between the two. I think that's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. What this is basically saying is it's using this is a classic case of parallelism. Okay, so we have here synonymous parallelism. The Torah, biblical Hebrew, works on it, and the Torah works on that very extensively. So this is basically saying this second phrase is saying the first phrase in a different way. Okay, so I'll translate again. Keep my statutes or walk in my statutes and keep my commandments. Be like me saying in English something like, keep all my laws, follow all of my ordinances. There's no technical definition in that context between a law and an ordinance, right? It's just trying to use repetition for emphasis, right? As we say just about every Torah study, repetition means emphasis, and that's exactly what's happening here. So this is saying really, you guys really, really have to follow everything I'm telling you to do. Okay, vasitim otam, and do them. And if you do, verse 4, ונתתי gishmechem ba'itam, and I will bring you your rains in the right time. So we spoke earlier. Actually, we didn't get to it yet, but we did. Where was it? I think we saw it in Zechariah. It actually was. This is the early rains, the Yoreh, and the late rains of the Malkosh. So I won't go into the whole thing again, but the way that the rainy season works, the rainy season in Israel is approximately between October 15th and approximately April 15th. And then you have the early rains, and then usually there's a bit of a pause around December or so, maybe even into January, where you get a little bit less rain, and then you get the late rains as the springtime comes. You can get rains, and they're kind of different from each other. The late rains can be a bit more, I would say, kind of maybe shorter, but more intense than the earlier rains. The earlier rains are going to be a bit longer and maybe a bit less intense overall. Okay. At any rate, basically what the Torah is saying here is, if you keep my commandments, then I'm going to bring you the rain in its right time. And the agriculture here in Israel is very reliant on the rainy season. The rainy season is what allows everything to germinate, to grow. It all happens pretty much during the rainy season. Once April 15th or so rolls around, then the rains disappear. Eventually the clouds just about disappear. Everything dries out, and that's when the harvest season comes, as we've spoken about many times. Okay? And the land shall give its produce. Okay, it's crops. It's translated as here. I just want to look at the root of this word yivul, which is usually translated as produce. It's translated as crops. Robert Alter translates it as, this is verse 4. Okay. It's yield. So let's do it this way. Oops. Shoham, you cannot do this. You're not allowed here. I'm sorry. Go. You can't do that. Let me try that one more time. No. 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 Enough now. Behave yourself, please. Okay. Sorry. You can't come up here, sweetheart. You cannot come up here. No, no, and no. Very mischievous little kitty cat. Okay. So, right, 26:4. We're going to go over to the Hebrew. And we want to look up this word right here, yivula, in the Biblical Hebrew dictionaries. Okay, so produce, yield, fruit. Okay. The Hebrew yaval. Let me just see something. Let me just see something for myself here. Job. No view. Okay. Yaval. Bear procession. Just give me 1 second here. Just give me 1 second, please. Okay. All right. So the definition of yivula, her produce or her output. Okay, produce of soil. And we have many examples. The land shall yield its produce. Okay, so produce, that which comes out of it, that which is led out of it. Okay. Okay, so going back to here, so they translated here as crops. Robert Alter translates it as, oops, where'd we go? As yield. Everett Fox translates it as, let me make this a little bit bigger. Yield. Okay. So if you keep the commandments, the rain will come in its right times, and the land will give out its produce, will produce its produce. And the trees of the field, meaning the orchards, shoham, stop it now. Show, no, you're out of control. And the trees of the field shall give their fruits. Literally, the tree of the field shall give its fruits, but this is the singular abstract, meaning it's just as the tree of the field shall give its fruit, but that singular represents the totality. Like you would say, even in English, if we say, I don't know, when you go to school, the teacher gives the homework or something like that, right? It's not speaking about a specific teacher. It's speaking about, it's using the singular to represent the entirety of all teachers that give homework, that will all give homework, and sometimes lots of it. Okay, let me check in to see if there are any questions or comments. So, verse 5. Okay. So, what Isig lachem Daesh et Batsir. Okay, so these are technical agricultural terms. Daesh, ladush is to thresh. Batsir is the harvesting of the grapes, even in modern Hebrew. Batsira anavim is the grape harvest. Okay. Everett Fox. Let's do a little Everett Fox rather than always having to rely on Robert Alter. Okay, so the threshing will overtake vintage for you, and I'll explain exactly what this means in a second. Let's also look. I just want for myself to look at the etymology of these words. So just give me 1 second here, and I'll share it with you guys. Okay, so Daesh is related to the word dash. Daled shin is the underlying root. Which means to thresh. Okay. That's weird. It doesn't have an entrance in the BDB. Interesting. Dishan. Just 1 second, please. Shoham. There it is. Okay, so threshing floor. Okay, from douche, not like shower or anything else. Okay, so to thresh. Okay. Right, so this is the underlying root word, which is the thread, tread, or thresh. And that's exactly what threshing is. Okay, dash. So this is the underlying root, dash. Okay. All right, this is really more for my own edification than anything. I just want to see what other words it was related to. But we can read here now in the BDB, Daesh. Okay, the process of threshing. It only appears once in that particular form, and that's here in our verse. Okay, Leviticus 26:5, but it is based on the underlying word douche, okay, which means ladouche means to trample or thresh. And let me just see one thing here. Again, kind of for myself. Okay. All right. I can check this all out later. But ladouche, to thread, to thresh. Okay. And so on and so forth. So that's ladouche. And then we have batzir. So daish is the threshing. And batzir here till the time of vintage. So we'll translate that, I guess, as vintage. But it really means the grape harvest. Okay. And we're going to go over here. Okay, so Batzir is the vintage or the grape harvest. It's not fortified. Again, I'm just looking at this for myself. Batzir, vintage. Okay. Imagery strong. So Strong's term Batzir highlights the time of the vintage or the grape harvest season when clusters are cut, right? Grape clusters, meaning bunches of grapes. Wine presses fill in covenantal themes, plenty, blah, 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 because the grapes because grapes ripen late in the agricultural cycle, Batzir became a climatic marker in Israel's agrarian calendar. So they don't really ripen that late. They ripen in the early to midsummer, like around July, at least in modern times. And I just want to check one more thing here. Yivatzer. One second. Just give me 1 second here. It's not a fortified grape. Defense fortified gathering things. Let me just look up one thing here. Okay. All right. Good enough. Sorry, I just wanted to look that up really for myself. Okay, so threshing will continue the grape harvest. So what does this mean? This means that there's going to be such abundance. The threshing is talking about we know what threshing is, right? Threshing is specifically, let's get a specific definition. Okay. Line threshing, thresh. Okay, so the process of beating or separating the seeds from the husks and straw of harvested plants. This can be done using a hand tool like a flail or a machine. Let's even see if we can get a okay. So what is threshing? Okay. So this is threshing. That's a sheaf, by the way. Okay, so we get an idea of threshing is what is threshing is. Of course, that's not the way they did it in ancient times. They didn't have steam engines, but basically, it's beating the stalks of grain until to separate the seeds from the rest of the plant. And then after that, they would do winnowing. Winnowing, they would throw the whole thing or that whole pile up into the air, and the seeds would come down onto the ground, and the chaff would blow away. That's separating the wheat from the chaff. Okay, but so now we see the significance. Now we see the significance, and the idea is basically what it's saying is that the barley and wheat harvest will continue until the grape harvest. In other words, things are going to be so abundant that you're still going to be harvesting your wheat. There's going to be so much barley and there's going to be so much wheat. Remember, we just passed the holiday of Shavuot. The holiday of Shavuot is associated with the wheat harvest. So there's going to be so much wheat that you're going to be processing that wheat until the midsummer, until the grapes are ready to be harvested, right? If it were a poor harvest, then you'd be done with the wheat pretty quickly, and there would be a pause before you started harvesting the grapes. But there's going to be such an abundance if you're following my commandments, says Yahweh. There's going to be such an abundance of produce, right? Yivul, that's the word we start for produce. Okay, Yivulah, the land shall give its produce. There'll be such an abundance of barley and wheat that the processing of the barley and wheat, the threshing of the barley and wheat, the wheat will continue until the grape harvest. Again, we spoke about the agricultural season a lot. We looked at the Gezer calendar. We're not going to go back into it right now, but we've already from other lessons, from other studies, gotten a good idea of what the agricultural season in Israel looks like. Okay. So where were we? Okay, so Yasig lechem daish et batzir ubatzir yasig et zarah. And the grape harvest will continue until the time that it's ready to plant the seeds for the next season. What's the seeds? The seeds are the grain seeds, the barley and wheat seeds. Okay, maybe it would be instructive to just take a second to go to, again, the Gezer calendar, which we've referenced before. So this is a calendar, not necessarily Hebrew, but it found in Gezer, which is an Israelite town, but it might be Canaanite. Okay, and what does it say? It's basically a yearly calendar. So to cut right to the chase, I'll just translate here. So 2 months of gathering, 2 months of early sowing, 2 months of late sowing. We're going to start here. So a month of harvesting barley, a month of harvest and finishing, that means wheat. So here we're talking about, and here they relate this to April and May. Okay, actually it's a little bit off. October, November. This goes with December. This goes December, February. Here, let's do it this way to make it a bit more clear. Okay, so we're talking about in May and June the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and then here we have the pruning. So this is exactly what it's talking about. This is the daish. This is the processing of the barley and the wheat. And then in July, August, then we have the vine pruning. Then we have the batzir. Okay. And let me just see one thing here. So this is Yerach Tzir Siorim. This is the 1 month. Oh my God, there's so much cat activity going on. What the heck is going on? Oh my God. A month of harvesting the barley. Yerach Tzir Chal. Chal. A month of harvesting and finishing off. Okay. And Yerach Zamir or Zamar. Okay, so they're not using the word here, batzir. They're using a different word, zamar, which means literally the pruning of the grapevines, but it's really referring to the grape harvest. So we have here in this Gezer calendar, which again is extra biblical. Okay, the Gezer calendar very briefly. Let's make it a bit bigger. Okay, a small limestone tablet with an early Canaanite inscription discovered in 1908. It's commonly dated to the 10th century BCE. Scholars divide as to whether the language is Phoenician or a dialect of Hebrew, and what the script is. The inscription is not a formal calendar, as it describes agricultural seasons with imprecise dates rather than precise divisions of time as would be required for a ritual bureaucratic calendar. As such, some of the time units comprise 2 months rather than 1, and none are referred to by month numbers or names. So it's an agricultural calendar. It's a kind of description of the yearly agricultural season, meaning the 12-month season of what happens agriculturally. Okay, and so we see here again. The point of bringing this up is that we have a month of harvesting the barley, a month of harvesting and finishing, and then we have the vine pruning. So this is the Daesh that's being spoken about in Leviticus 26, and this is the Betzir that's being spoken about right afterwards. Right. So we go back again to our Leviticus 26, verse 5. Then we have that the threshing, the processing of the barley and the wheat, will catch up, will continue until the time of the harvesting of the grapes. And then we have the time of harvesting of the grapes, so will continue until the planting. So where do we see planting here? We see it right here. Okay, 2 months of early sowing, 2 months of late sowing. Sowing is planting, right? So we have the vine pruning. Okay, that's the barley harvest. I'm sorry, the grape harvest, and this is what they're saying is in July and August. Okay, so the grape harvest, which starts in July, August, will continue for so long. There'll be such an abundance of grapes that it's going to continue until December and into January and beyond, when the sowing season, when the seeding, when the planting of seeds begins, okay, or occurs. So this is again what this is saying in a nutshell. What verse 5 is saying is that you're going to have such an abundance that you're still going to be processing the old crops, or the old, I'm sorry, I should say the old form. I shouldn't say the old, one form of produce, when it's ready to start processing the other form of produce. That's how abundant the produce of the land is going to be if you follow my commandments. Okay. Okay. Maybe we'll end with this verse. It's already getting pretty late here. We are going to end with this verse. And you will eat your food abundantly. Okay. Translated here is all you want. Okay. Yishabtem levetach be'artzachem, and you will dwell safely, securely in your land. Okay. We're going to stop here. Let's just get a Everett Fox translation of verse 5. For change, what do I do with Everett Fox? There he goes. Okay, so threshing will overtake the vintage. Vintage means the vine picking, right? The picking from the vines. Vintage will overtake sowing. You shall eat your food to being satisfied and be settled in security in your land. Robert Alter finally says, and your threshing will overtake the vintage, and the vintage will overtake the sowing, and you will eat your bread to the full, and you will dwell securely in your land. And he has a comment there. Okay, so this image of a kind of fast forward of the agricultural cycle as a hyperbolic representation of fertility is used in Amos 9:13. We won't get that there. Once again, and your bread. Okay, so it means bread technically, but it represents all of food. It's a synecdoche. I call it a synecdoche, but I think that's the wrong pronunciation. Synecdoche. I think it's synecdoche, something like that. That's the way it's really pronounced. I always like to call it synecdoche. That's what I've been calling it for years. That's what I'll continue to call it. Okay, so that's it. All right, everyone, we are at the end of today's Torah study. Shabbat Shalom. Soy Douglas de Venezuela y quisiera de alguien pueda ayudarme a aprender Torah como ustedes. Toda rabá. You're welcome. Douglas, again, if you're interested in learning, Torah or Hebrew, you can contact me privately and we can set up lessons. But that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's study. And it's getting pretty late here. It's after 9 o'clock here in Israel. So I'm going to wish everybody a good evening or a good day, depending on where you are in the world. Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov, a peaceful Sabbath. and a good week. Are there any final questions or comments before we end the study? Anybody? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. I will again put up, if you want to join our community, you'd be helping us out financially. We're not asking for a lot of money to join, and you'll get a lot more access to the community. You'll get a lot more access to myself and to other leaders of the community. It's only fair because we do have a lot of requests, and so we all have limited time, and so it's only fair that those who are supporting the community financially, and we do not use the money to go out and take long ski vacations in, I don't know, wherever. We use it to put to the important projects that we're working on that I've delineated in other places, such as running these free studies. We want to set up a learning center. We want to set up eventually schools for children. We have a whole bunch of plans, and we do request your support in helping us. If you believe in the cause of Karaism, in the Tanach-only, or in the Choserim Tanach, the Return to Tanakh movement, as I like to call our movement, then please help out financially, either by joining our community, or you can donate. If you give a portion of your salary on a regular basis, quote unquote tithe, or any other portion of your salary, then we would ask you to please direct some or all of it towards us. And there is a QR code for the donation link. If you have a rich uncle that left you millions of dollars, then speak to me privately and we'll figure out the details. But yes, we really rely on everybody to help support our programs. They're very important. I truly believe if you listen to the monologue at the beginning of the talk, you'll see how important I think it is at this point in time in the history of the nation of Israel, the history of the current state of Israel, and the history of the world, to really promote the ideas of Karaism, to promote the ideas of Tanach-only, to promote the ideas of returning to the Tanakh, the Tanakh. Okay, so that's my little pitch. If it's in your heart to help out, then it's much appreciated. Other than that, we will continue to do, of course, our regular weekly studies that are open to the public. If you want private lessons, one-on-one lessons, either in biblical Hebrew or in Torah and Tanakh, then contact me privately. If you're planning to visit the land of Israel, we've also set up a tour company called Lion of Israel Tours. And boy, there is nothing we love more than to show people around the land of Israel. So you can also contact, if you have yourself, your family, or you have a group that wants to visit Israel, then man, there's nothing more that I love than showing people. I love teaching the Torah and studying the Torah, but also showing people around the land of Israel, just to see, the light in people's eyes light up, especially when they're connecting Israel to ancient times and to modern times. It's really rewarding. Anyway, so that's that. Hope you enjoyed the study. We'll see you again with the help of Yahweh. We'll see you again next week. And I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov. We will go out, as we always do, with music. So thanks again for joining us. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.